The name on my phone said my son. We hadn't spoken in about 6 weeks, which wasn't unusual anymore, not since he moved back east and got wrapped up in his new life out there. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Dad. His voice was flat, not sad, not gentle. The way you sound when you're delivering information you've already decided on. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything. Grandpa passed away this morning. Heart failure. It happened fast, in his sleep. I've already spoken to his attorney. The house and the hardware business. He updated his will last year. Everything goes to me. I know that's not what you expected, but I wanted you to hear it from me before you found out some other way. He paused. Waited. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was standing in my father's hardware store, 3 aisles back, next to the wall of drawer pulls and cabinet hinges I'd been helping him reorganize since 7 that morning. My father was 12 feet away, on his knees with a pricing gun, muttering about the new label supplier sending the wrong size adhesive backs. I smiled, not because anything was funny, because my son had just made the worst mistake of his 51 years on this earth. Let me back up. My name is Walter Goss. I'm 64 years old. I spent 30 years as a high school shop teacher in Delwood, Ohio, same town where I was raised, same county where my father, Bernard Goss, built Goss Hardware from a single rented storefront in 1971 into the kind of place that's been part of people's lives for so long they stop noticing it's there. The way you stop noticing the water tower or the steeple on First Methodist. It's just part of the landscape, part of what makes a place a place. My father is 81 years old. He still comes in 4 days a week. He walks slower than he used to, uses a cane when his hip is bad, but his mind is sharp as a box cutter, and he knows where every single item in that store belongs. He trained 3 generations of employees. He can tell you without looking which drawer the metric hex keys are in versus the standard, and he will correct you if you mix them up. My son, I'll call him by his name, Randall, left Delwood the month after he graduated from Ohio State. 22 years old, degree in business administration, and the firm belief that staying in a small town was something that happened to people who hadn't tried hard enough. He built a decent career in commercial real estate in Philadelphia. Made good money. Sent birthday cards sometimes. Showed up for Christmas every other year if the flights worked out. My father loved him. Bragged about him to the regulars who came in on Saturday mornings for project advice and small talk. Would pull out his phone and show people Randall's LinkedIn photo like it was something. My grandson, the developer. The pride in his voice was real. I never begrudged him that. But here's the thing about my father. He never asked either of us for anything. He was a self-contained man, built that way by necessity and temperament, and he expressed love through presence, through showing up, through fixing things, through being reliably, quietly there. Randall got the verbal praise, the public acknowledgement. I got the Tuesday mornings, the Saturday afternoons helping with inventory, the long drives after Mom died in 2019 when neither of us felt like talking but we sat together anyway. I never thought about the store, never once sat there calculating what it might be worth or what I might do with it someday. It was my father's. It was him. The idea of thinking of it as an inheritance felt wrong in a way I couldn't fully articulate, but didn't need to. So when Randall called, while I was 12 feet from the man he'd just told me was dead, what I felt wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something colder, cleaner. The specific clarity that comes when something that seemed complicated suddenly isn't. I kept my voice even. That's a lot to take in, I said. I'll need some time to think about it. Of course, Randall said. He sounded relieved. He'd expected more resistance. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know. I appreciate that, I said. I'll be in touch. I hung up. My father looked up from the label gun. Who was that? Wrong number, I said. He gave me the look he'd been giving me since I was 9 years old. One eyebrow, slight tilt of the head. That meant he didn't believe me, but was choosing not to push. He went back to his labels. I stood there for a moment, holding my phone, looking at him. 81 years old, on his knees on a concrete floor, repricing cabinet hardware. His coffee thermos sitting on the shelf above him, same thermos he'd had since 1998. The one with the dent on the side from when it fell off a ladder, and he refused to replace it because it still worked fine. I walked to the back office and called my father's doctor. Dr. Plunkett had been my father's physician for 11 years. His receptionist put me through when I explained it was urgent. Walter, what's going on? My father is alive and standing in his store right now, I said. but I just received a call claiming he passed away this morning. I need to understand, is there anything you know about his health that I should be aware of? Any recent change? Anything that might have prompted someone to believe he was in serious decline? A pause. No. I saw your father 2 weeks ago for his quarterly check. His heart is what it is, we're managing it, but there's nothing acute, nothing that would point to imminent risk. Who told you he died? I told him. Another pause. Longer. Walter, I think you should talk to someone. Not me, but someone. If your son is making those kinds of claims about your father's estate. I know, I said. I'm working on it. Thank you. I sat in the back office for a few minutes after I hung up. There was a framed photo on the wall above my father's desk that I'd looked at 1,000 times. Him and my mother on the sidewalk in front of the store, 1974, 3 years after they opened, before I was born. They were laughing at something outside the frame. My mother had her hand on his arm. The sign behind them said, Goss Hardware, hand-painted, the letters not quite even. I called Owen Dalloway. He'd been my father's attorney for 22 years, estate planning, business matters, the kind of steady, reliable presence my father gravitated toward in every area of his life. I'd met Owen maybe a dozen times at various points. He answered on the second ring, Walter, what can I do for you? I told him what Randall had said, that my father had updated his will the previous year, that everything was going to Randall, that my father was, according to my son, deceased as of this morning. Owen was quiet for a beat. Walter, I drafted your father's will 14 months ago. A standard update. He wanted to make some adjustments after your mother's estate was fully settled. The distribution is equal between you and Randall. 50-50, house, the business, liquid assets. That document has not been changed. I would know. Is it possible he went to another attorney? Anything is possible, Owen said. But your father has been my client for 2 decades. He would have told me. And frankly, Walter, if someone is representing a will that says otherwise, that document is either a forgery or we're dealing with something I need to report. Can you come in? Tomorrow, I said. But Owen, I need to understand what Randall would have needed to do to make a claim. If he had a document, forged or otherwise, what would he need? Owen's voice dropped slightly. Depends on how far he's trying to take it. To file for probate, to actually initiate any kind of transfer, he'd need a death certificate, a certified copy. And to get that, there would need to be a documented death, which means either he's waiting and planning something, or he already has something falsified, or he's planning to make it true, I said. Owen didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful. Walter, if you have reason to believe your father is at risk, that changes what we're talking about significantly. I know, I said. I'm going to make some calls. I went back out to the floor. My father had finished with the cabinet pulls and moved on to a display of door levers he'd been meaning to reorganize for a month. He looked up when I came over. You look like you ate something bad, he said. Dad. I sat down on the step stool he kept in the aisle. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you react. He set down the door lever, looked at me. I told him about the call, watched his face move through confusion, and then a stillness that was harder to read. My father had always processed things internally, let things settle before he responded. He stood there for a moment, not saying anything, looking past me at the middle distance. He called while you were standing here, he said finally. Yes, while you were standing 12 feet away from me. Yes. He picked up his thermos, took a long drink, set it back on the shelf. About 3 months ago, he said, Randall called me, said he'd been thinking about the future, about what made sense for the business. He asked me if I'd considered that it might be better managed by someone with a business background, someone who understood development and assets and market value. He paused. I told him the store wasn't a development opportunity. He said he understood, but that he wanted me to think about it, that he'd done some research and that the property alone, the buildings on Main, you know the block, he said it was worth more than I realized. I knew the block. I also knew that my grandfather had built that building, and that my father owned it outright, and that the idea of selling it had never once come up in any conversation I'd been part of. I told him I appreciated his concern. My father continued, but that the store and the building were going to be handled the way I'd already arranged, and that both of you would be taken care of equally. He didn't like that. What did he say? He said that equal didn't account for contribution, that he'd built a career, built skills, that he understood the commercial real estate market, and I didn't, and that leaving half to a retired shop teacher was. He stopped. Those were his words, not mine. There was a long silence. Somewhere in the front of the store, the bell above the door chimed, and a customer came in. One of the regulars. I could hear him calling out a hello, and my father's part-time employee, a young woman named Deb, who'd worked Tuesdays and Fridays for the past 3 years, answering from the register. "We need to call someone," I said. "The police," my father said. "What would we tell them?" "Not yet. Not just the police." I thought about it. Owen first. "And I know someone else. You remember the Ackerman family? Used to come in every spring for garden supplies. Father, mother, 3 kids? Sure. Tom Ackerman. His youngest won the science fair 2 years running. His middle daughter, Beverly. She's a detective now, works financial crimes for the county. I coached her in JV basketball in 2003. She still sends me a card at Christmas." I pulled out my phone. "I'd like to call her." My father looked at me for a moment. The afternoon light came through the front windows and fell across the store in long rectangles, catching the dust motes that always floated in hardware stores, the fine particles of wood and metal and rubber that settled on everything. He'd been breathing that air for 50 years. "Make your calls," he said, and went back to the door levers. Beverly Ackerman met me at Owen's office the next morning. She was in her mid-40s, had her father's build and her mother's precision, the kind of person who listened with her whole face and gave nothing away. She sat across from Owen's desk and heard everything. My father's account, Owen's assessment of the will, the recording I'd made of Randall's phone call, which Owen confirmed I had the right to record under Ohio law. When I finished, Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then, "The core problem here is that your son has made a claim but hasn't filed anything. Calling you to say your father is dead isn't a crime. It's ugly, it's suspicious, but on its own it's not actionable. We need to understand what he's planning to do next." She turned to Owen. "If he tries to file for probate with a false will and a false death certificate, how quickly would that surface?" "Quickly," Owen said. "I'd be notified. And a forged death certificate filed with the probate court is a felony. Multiple counts. But we'd need to catch him in the act, essentially. Or get him to say explicitly what he intends." Beverly looked at me. "Is he planning to come here? To Delwood?" He didn't say. But he told me he wanted to discuss the estate. And he's the kind of person who prefers to handle things in person when he thinks he has the upper hand. "Good," she said. "That works in our favor." She turned to my father, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner chair with his cane across his knees. "Mr. Goss, I want to be direct with you. If your son believes you're already dead and he discovers you're not, we have a problem. He'll know the false death claim failed, and he may try to accelerate whatever he's planning." She paused. "I'd like to set something up. If he comes to Delwood, I'd like to be ready. That means a few things. First, I want you somewhere he doesn't expect. Not your house, not the store. Walter's place. He doesn't know where I live," I said. "I moved 5 years ago, other side of town. Better. Second, I want cameras at your house and at the store, exterior and interior. Standard equipment, nothing obvious. If he shows up at either location and does anything, tries to access files, takes anything, says anything relevant, I want it captured." She looked at my father again. "Third, I want us to let this play out just enough. Give him a little rope. If he believes you're dead, he may try to move quickly, and people who move quickly make mistakes." My father nodded slowly. "Do what you need to do." We moved him to my place that evening. He packed a small bag, with a slowness that had nothing to do with his pace of movement. He touched things as he passed them. The coat hooks by the back door where my mother's raincoat had hung until 2 years after she died, when he finally moved it to the closet but not out of the house. The counter where she'd rolled out pie crust on Sunday afternoons. He stood in the kitchen for a long moment before we left. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." The next 4 days were the strangest of my life. My father slept in my guest room, watched the news and old westerns, did a crossword puzzle every morning. He ate breakfast with me and complained mildly about my coffee, which he said was too strong, which, coming from a man who'd been drinking motor oil since 1968, I found hard to take seriously. I went to work at the store each day, kept everything normal. Deb handled the register. I handled the floor. Beverly's people installed cameras. Owen monitored the estate accounts. Nothing happened, no calls, no contact, no activity. On the 4th night, I almost believed I'd misread it. That Randall had done something stupid and impulsive and then thought better of it. My father said as much over dinner. Maybe he came to his senses. Maybe, I said. My phone rang at 11 that night. "Randall." I looked at my father across the table. He nodded. Beverly had set up the recording function before she left that evening, I answered. Dad. His voice was different, warmer. The business flat tone from the first call was gone. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I was too abrupt before. I know this is hard. Losing someone. A pause, just long enough to seem sincere. I think we should meet. I'm actually coming to Delwood this week. I'd like to go through some of Grandpa's things together. The house? The store? I think we can figure out something fair. Can you meet me Thursday? At the store, around 9? I'll be there, I said. I hung up and looked at Beverly, who was sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop. He's coming to the store, I said. Thursday morning, she said. We'll have people in place. You'll be wired. Your father stays here. She looked at my father. No matter what, if he sees you, it changes everything. My father said, I'll stay. I slept about 4 hours that night. I lay in the dark and thought about Randall as a kid, 7 years old, taking apart a clock radio to see how it worked, coming to find me to help him put it back together. 12, calling me from a payphone at a gas station in Columbus because he'd gotten turned around, driving to a friend's house, and was embarrassed to call his mother. 19, sitting in the cab of my truck outside the emergency room after a car accident that wasn't his fault, shaking and not saying anything, and me just sitting there with him until he stopped. I didn't understand when it had changed, or if it had changed, or if I'd just never seen the version of him that was always underneath. Thursday morning, I drove to the store. Randall's rental car was already in the lot when I pulled in, a silver sedan with Pennsylvania plates, parked at an angle the way he'd parked since he was 16. Beverly's voice came through the earpiece she'd fitted me with the night before. We've got units front and back, eyes on the building. You're covered. I walked in. Randall was in the middle of the store, hands in his jacket pockets, looking around with an expression I recognized. The look of a person calculating square footage. He was dressed like he'd come from a meeting. Dark jacket, no tie, expensive shoes that were already picking up the fine grit of the concrete floor. He turned when he heard the bell and smiled. He had always been a handsome man, looked like his mother's side. The smile reached his eyes, which was what made it work. Dad. He crossed the floor and embraced me, briefly, the way men who aren't accustomed to embracing do it. Hands on shoulders, one firm pat, step back. Thanks for making time. Of course, I said. It's strange being here without him, Randall said, looking around. I keep expecting to hear him in the back. I know, I said, and I watched him with the same stillness he didn't know I was capable of. I wanted to talk about the path forward, he said, the business, the property. I've had a broker run some numbers. He pulled out his phone, showed me a PDF, an assessment, the property, the building, the business value. He'd had it done already. This is what we're looking at, realistically. The commercial value of the Main Street building alone is significant. And a hardware store in a town this size, in this market. He shook his head. It's sentimental, I get that. But sentiment doesn't build anything. Your grandfather built something, I said. Randall looked at me. He built something for his time, 50 years ago. The world is different now, Dad. That's not a criticism, it's just true. He pocketed his phone. I want to be fair. I know the will as it stands gives you 50%. I'm willing to honor that, in a monetary sense. A buyout, something reasonable. You wouldn't have to deal with the operational headaches. You could retire, actually retire. The will as it stands, I said. Right, the original will. Something shifted in his face, very small, just for a second. I mean yes. The current document. I spoke with Owen Dalloway, I said. 4 days ago. He told me the document hasn't changed. 50-50, same as always. Equal between us. Randall was quiet. So when you called me, I said, and told me your grandfather had updated his will to leave everything to you, where did that come from? His jaw tightened. Owen may not have the most recent version. He's your grandfather's attorney of 22 years. He's the only one who's ever drafted a document for him. So where did this other version come from, Randall? The warmth drained out of his face. What replaced it was something I didn't have a name for, but I recognized it. The look of a person who has decided they've been too patient. He reached inside his jacket and produced a document, folded once, creased. He set it on the glass display case between us. That's the updated will, signed and notarized. Everything to me. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want it to come to this, but Grandpa and I had a conversation 6 weeks ago that changed his mind. You can contest it if you want, that's your right. But it'll take time and money, and at the end of it, the document holds. That's a forgery, I said. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. Prove it. I don't need to, I said. Owen will. Owen is 63 years old and handles wills for farmers, Randall said. You want to take this to a real attorney. Be my guest. He picked up the document, folded it back into his jacket. Dad, I'm trying to do you a kindness here. The buyout offer is genuine. Take it. Let me handle this the right way. You don't want to spend the next 2 years fighting over something that's already been decided. You told me your grandfather was dead, I said. A beat. He is. I'd like you to say that again. He's gone, Dad. I'm sorry. I know you were close. But the store doesn't care about that. The property market doesn't care. And holding on to a business out of grief is. He isn't dead, Randall. Silence. I talked to him this morning. I made him breakfast. He's at my house right now, probably watching the Weather Channel and complaining about my coffee. I watched my son's face. He's been there since Monday. We moved him after you called, when we realized what you were planning. Randall went very still. The call you made to tell me he was dead while I was standing 12 feet from him? I recorded it. This conversation is being recorded. There are 6 law enforcement units around this building right now. I paused. I spent 50 years thinking you were someone I understood. Turns out I was working with incomplete information. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice had gone thin. Step back from the counter, Beverly said, coming through the office door with 2 uniformed officers behind her. Randall Goss, you're being detained for questioning in connection with elder fraud, forgery of a legal document, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Randall looked at me. He looked at Beverly. He looked at the officers. The sophisticated, well-dressed commercial developer from Philadelphia looked, in that moment, like a man who had made a very long series of decisions he could not now unmake. You wired yourself, he said to me, like it was a betrayal. You told me your grandfather was dead while I was standing next to him, I said. You forged his will. You flew to Ohio to finalize whatever came next. I shook my head. You didn't leave me a lot of other options. They took him outside. Beverly stayed behind while the officers walked him to a waiting vehicle. She looked around the store for a moment, at the wall of hardware, sorted into labeled drawers, at the old tin signs and the bulletin board near the register where people had been posting notices and business cards since 1978, at the photo of my grandparents that my father had hung above the door to the back room, faded now, but still there. We'll need you both to come in and give formal statements, she said. And the forgery charge will require Owen's testimony about the legitimate document. But with the recording and the forged will itself, she shook her head. He made it pretty straightforward. What happens now? I asked. He'll be arraigned. Bail will likely be set. It's not a violent crime. The trial could take 6 to 8 months. But Walter, she looked at me directly. Document everything. Every call, every contact. If he reaches out to you or to your father, you record it and you call me. She left. I stood alone in the store for a few minutes. Deb came in at 9:30 and raised her eyebrows at the 2 unmarked cars still visible through the front window, and I told her briefly that there had been a family matter and it was handled. She nodded with the discretion of someone who understood that some things didn't need more explanation than that. I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. How's the coffee? I said. Still terrible, he said. What happened? Beverly has him. It's done. Are you all right? A pause. I need to think about that for a little while, he said. Give me some time with it. I'll be home by noon, I said. We can open some soup. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. That's fine. 3 weeks later, we sat in Owen's office. Beverly's department had filed formal charges. Elder financial abuse, forgery of a legal instrument, fraud. Randall's attorney entered a plea of not guilty. The DA was confident. The forged document had been analyzed by a forensic examiner who identified it as produced within the past 60 days, and the notary stamp had been fabricated, a name and seal with no corresponding licensed notary in the state of Ohio. Randall was looking at 5 to 8 years, eligible for parole in 4, possibly depending on cooperation. My father sat in the chair next to me with his cane across his knees. Owen set the paperwork out. Frank, Owen said. My father's name. Owen was the only person besides my mother who ever called him that without it feeling strange. Given everything, you have the option to contest Randall's share of the estate on grounds consistent with Ohio's Slayer statute as applied to elder abuse. It's not a perfect fit, but there's precedent for disinheritance under these circumstances. The court would likely uphold it. My father looked at the paperwork for a long moment. What does Walter get? He said finally. Everything, Owen said. The business, the property, the house, liquid assets, all of it. My father was quiet. Outside, Main Street was doing what it always did. Slow, steady, the rhythm of a town that didn't rush. A delivery truck went by. A woman walked past with a stroller. The sign for Goss Hardware was visible from Owen's window. Same block it had always been on. "Do it," my father said. I looked at him. "Dad, you don't have to. I'm not doing it for the money," he said. The same way he always said things when he'd already decided. "The store needs to go to someone who knows what it is." Randall looked at it and saw square footage. He looked at me. "You've looked at it your whole life and seen where people come to figure out how to fix something. That's different." He sat back. "Besides, I'm not dead yet. I'll be in there 4 days a week telling you what you're doing wrong for the next 10 years at least. You're not rid of me." "I wasn't trying to be," I said. Owen shuffled the papers together and reached for his pen. We drove back to the store after. My father wanted to check on the door lever display he hadn't finished. I drove, and he rode beside me, and neither of us said much. The town went past outside the windows. The high school where I'd taught for 30 years. The intersection where the old Rexall used to be. The street Randall grew up on. The park where I'd coached kids through free throws and layup drills for decades. I thought about my son. Not with anger, exactly. With something more complicated. He was my son. He was going to be in a courtroom in 6 months. And I was going to have to sit there and give testimony and look at him across a room and be whatever a father is in that situation. I didn't know yet what that would feel like. What I knew was that when they called me to the stand, I would tell the truth. The same truth I'd been living for 64 years in a town where people knew my name and my father's name and still brought their projects in on Saturday mornings and asked for advice about something they were trying to fix. The store was quiet when we got in. Deb had the radio on low. The afternoon regulars hadn't arrived yet. My father went straight to the door lever display, picked up where he'd left off, muttering about the grouping by finish versus function, which was a debate we'd been having since March. I went to the back and made 2 cups of coffee. I brought his out and set it next to his thermos, the one with the dent in the side. He picked it up without looking, took a drink, made a face. "This is still terrible coffee." "I know," I said. "You should fix that." "I'm working on it," I said. He handed me a door lever to hang. I hung it. He adjusted it 2 millimeters to the left. I let him. We worked down the aisle together in the late afternoon quiet, the town going on around us outside the windows, ordinary and unchanged and entirely ours.